Hi everyone, this is Parker from TestPrepChampions.com, and today I'm going to be doing a video that's on a topic a lot more serious than any of my other videos. It's not an easy issue to address by any means, but it's something that's very important, and I feel like it really needs to be talked about. So the topic is the Pygmalion Effect and the story of the self-fulfilling prophecy in education. So before we jump in though, let me just give you a really brief story about why I became so interested in this topic in the first place. So a few years ago, I was doing some tutoring for summer school students, and I was helping with an algebra class. I worked with a lot of students. One of them was one of my star pupils. He was really motivated, enthusiastic, and focused right from the get-go, and honestly, I couldn't have asked for a better student. He struggled a little bit at first with the math, but within a few weeks, he was able to do some of the hardest stuff that students have to do for high school algebra, like problems with logarithms, that kind of thing. So under my guidance, he was able to master it, and he ended up passing the course. Now, on the last day after we were cleaning up and the students had left, one of the head instructors, one of the actual teachers at the school, said something to me like, I can't believe that student was able to do that in spite of his learning disabilities. Now, I had never been told that the student had learning disabilities. I had no idea. The whole time I had viewed him as a star pupil, and in fact, to be honest, he had picked up some of the concepts faster than some of the other students. So here I was having a conversation with one of the head instructors who was telling me that the student had learning disabilities, and the expert said that he'd never be able to do math, or he wouldn't be able to do it well to any substantial degree. And so from my own first-hand experience, I saw that that was completely false, that was not true. He performed very well after some instruction. So I was really surprised to hear that, and it kind of led me down a path where I did a lot of research, and the best answer that I've been able to come up with to explain why he was able to do so well with the class is the Pygmalion Effect and the self-fulfilling prophecy in education. So with this in context here, let's move forward a little bit. So I want to first read a quote here from Dr. Robert T. Tauber, who said, "One's expectations about a person can eventually lead that person to behave and achieve in ways that confirm those expectations." All right, so with that quote, I'm going to tell a story here, the Pygmalion myth. Let this story kind of prime the pump. Just listen to it, and it's going to help you understand the concept of the Pygmalion myth and the Pygmalion Effect a lot faster as I get into it. So the Pygmalion Effect, it's named after the ancient myth of Pygmalion. It's a Greek myth from ancient Greece. And so basically in the story, Pygmalion is a sculptor, and he doesn't like any of the women from his city, so what he does is he makes a statue of a woman out of ivory, and it's perfect. It's everything he wants in a woman, except that it's not real, obviously, it's just a statue. And so Pygmalion, the sculptor, falls in love with the statue. And so then what happens next is he goes before the Greek goddess of love, and he wishes that the bride could become real. And so the goddess of love grants his wish, and he comes home to find that his sculpture that he made has become a real human being, exactly as he envisioned it. Alright, so let that soak in a little bit. And we're going to talk about the self-fulfilling prophecy. And so a lot of people have probably heard about this before, but for those who haven't, a self-fulfilling prophecy is basically an expectation that we hold that drives our behavior towards making the expectation a reality. So here's an example of this. So as a college student might believe that they're going to get an A on a test. And so what they do is they study hard, they go to class, they focus, they go into the test expecting to do well, and therefore they do well. So that would be an example of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a positive sense. So it can work the other way too. For example, if on the other hand the student doesn't believe that they're going to do well, they don't expect to do well, maybe they study, maybe they go to class, but it doesn't really matter because without that belief there, they have a self-fulfilling belief that they're going to do badly on the test. They're probably not going to do well no matter what. So keep that in mind. It can go both ways. So that's the self-fulfilling prophecy. We're going to talk about the self-fulfilling prophecy now in terms of education. So let me define the Pygmalion Effect. So my definition is the Pygmalion Effect is the phenomenon whereby positive expectations placed on another typically by someone in a position of authority, like a teacher or another figure like that, leads to an increase in the person's performance. So that's the Pygmalion effect, and the reverse of this is what's called the Golem effect. So the Golem effect, we can think of that as the phenomenon whereby negative expectations placed on somebody leads to a decrease in that person's performance. And as you can see, there's a diagram on screen. I think it's really helpful for explaining this. The first step, the teacher forms an expectation about the student, and because of that expectation, the teacher is then going to behave differently. They're going to treat the student differentially based on that expectation, and this is eventually going to lead the student to change their behavior in response to the teacher, right? And so then when the teacher sees this, it's going to confirm in their mind what that expectation was. It strengthens it, and then we go back to square one. So you might be wondering by now, is there any evidence for this? Where does the evidence come from for the Pygmalion effect? And so one of the hallmark studies of this is work done by Rosenthal and Jacobson back in the 1960s. And so basically, Rosenthal and Jacobson were researchers, and they wanted to see if creating expectations in teachers' minds about their students' achievement potentials would actually affect how the students achieved. And so what they did was they gave students from kindergarten to 5th grade a standardized intelligence test, like an IQ test. They didn't give the real results to the teachers, though. They randomly picked about 5 students in each class, and they called them spurters. So they told the teachers that these kids who were spurters were going to outperform all the other students. And they explicitly told the teachers who the spurters were, but keep in mind, they weren't actually spurters, right? They were just randomly picked students, and the researchers told the teachers that they were spurters to see what was going to happen, to see if those students would then go on to actually achieve at higher levels, right? And the researchers knew their real IQs the whole time. So by the end of the study, the researchers then gave the exact same IQ test to everybody, and what they found was that the spurters, the students who were said to be spurters, who were said to be intellectual bloomers, actually showed significant increase in their IQ test performance. So from this, Rosenthal and Jacobson concluded that when the teachers had high expectations for the students, it caused them to actually perform much better. So the teachers were told that the students were intellectual spurters. They treated the students like intellectual spurters, and therefore the students performed as if they were and actually became intellectual spurters. Now, it's only fair to mention this study has been met with some criticism and skepticism since the 1960s. And so I'm not a mental health expert, obviously. I'm not a psychologist, so I'm not going to get into all of the criticisms, but you can look them up. They are out there. But there are a lot of experts and other studies done that have also validated the results that Rosenthal and Jacobson found. And so as we keep going here, we're going to see some quotes from other researchers and experts and some other studies that support this one and back it up. So in my opinion, I think that the researchers here, they were mostly correct here. Expectations, I've seen it firsthand with students. Raising expectations, having high expectations really does boost performance. So I think that they got a lot right here. But just keep in mind that, there are some critics of the study. Okay, so let's look at some quotes here. This is a quote from Teaching as a Subversive Activity by Neil Postman and Charles Weingarter, and in it, there's what they said. They said that, in reference to the study, what we see is a product of what we believe to be out there. We see things not as they are, but as we are. So in other words, what he's saying is basically, objective reality is something that we're not seeing. What we're seeing is not how things actually are. What we're seeing is a reflection of what we are, right? And a reflection of our own beliefs. Okay, so to keep going with the quote, he said, "We see things not as they are, but as we are. The case of the elementary school children is quite similar to a different experiment, but with an additional dimension. The teachers perceived these children as intelligent because they were expecting to see intelligent behavior." End quote. And this is more from Postman and Weingartner. They said, "The teachers made the reality that was there, but we can assume that once the teachers made that reality, the children began to make one of their own. The children modified their behavior in accordance with the positive expectations of their teachers. And the emphasis here is mine. Basically, what they're saying here is that the teachers had their own idea of reality, they had their own expectations, and they projected this onto the students, and the students in turn kind of stepped right into the role and behaved as they were expected to, and eventually this led them to confirming the expectations that the teachers had. So it's as like that diagram that I showed. Let me go back to that here. It's a cycle, right? So the teacher has the expectation, and the student acts in accordance with the expectation, and the teacher sees it, and it confirms in their mind, and it keeps going and keeps going. So that's kind of what they're saying here with these quotes. Okay, so let's speculate now on where these expectations come from. So it's mainly from different impressions. So a good example is older siblings, and I was the oldest sibling in my family, so I never had this happen, but I've talked to friends who have said that this has happened to them. So so I talked to a friend. Their older siblings were star pupils, they were high achievers. When my friend got into class, the teachers just put a lot of pressure on him to excel academically because they expected that from him based off of what they knew about the siblings. So on the other hand, I've had friends who their older siblings were troublemakers, so when they got into class, the teachers treated them differently because the expectation they had from the older siblings. Okay, so IQ scores, we've already seen that in the Rosenthal-Jacobson study, how the knowledge of how smart a student is or how not smart a student is can lead to differential treatment. So parents, that's another one. So teachers, if you're a teacher, this is probably going to be easier to relate to than others. If not, just kind of put yourself in the shoes of one here. So we know that the impressions that someone gets from a student's parents can lead to their expectations about the student. So, for example, let's say that you're a member of one political party, and you know that the students' parents are active and vocal members in your community of the opposite political party. So let's say I don't really care what your political view is. I could care less. This is just for the sake of illustrating a point. Let's say that you're a Republican and the students' parents are Democrats, right? Or vice versa. You're a Democrat and you know that the students' parents are really loud and vocal members of the Republican Party, right? So this can lead to an impression or an expectation about what the students like just based off of the parents' behavior, okay? And so lastly, behaviors. So let's say on the first day of school, a student misbehaves. This can lead the teacher to get the impression that the student's a bad kid, that they're always disruptive, and it can kind of shape the way they see the student's behavior from there on out. And so I just need to stop here for a second and point out that my point here is not to bash teachers. A lot of people in my family are teachers. That's not at all what we're saying here. Is a lot of unconscious behavior, right? So we all have our biases, whether we want to admit them or not. We all have different filters that we see the world through, and it's not the fault of the teachers. The point here is not to place blame. The point here is just to draw attention to the fact that this stuff is very real. Expectations can positive or negative, can lead to can really make an impact on somebody in a good way or a bad way, and so that's what we need to draw attention to here. So the point is not to place blame; it's to spread awareness of this phenomenon and hopefully encourage you at the end of the video to take away from this some positive knowledge that you can use in your own life. So as we keep going here, let's look at a quote here. We were just talking about some potential areas where bias can come from. So let's move on and shift gears here, and we want to really try to now answer the question, so why do teacher expectations lead to students behaving differently? So here's a quote from Dr. Karl Pond from the University of Calgary, and this was from Teacher Expectation Socio-Psychological Dynamics, and here's what he said. It is safe to make the generalization that for many primary school children, the teacher's credibility rating is high. She is the person who knows. If she communicates to the child continuously that his performance is poor, this will undoubtedly influence his self-concept and the goals he strives to achieve. Alright, so here's another quote here. This one's from Dr. Rubin in Facts and Feelings in the Classroom, and he said that the position taken here is that there's a close relationship between the teacher's expectations for the learner, the teacher's treatment output of the learner, and ultimately the child's expectation. The expectation of self is inseparable from his self-image. So both of these quotes are dealing with either the self-image or the self-concept, and basically what we're saying here is that, the student views the teacher as an authority figure. It doesn't always have to be a teacher, it can be anybody else, a coach, or anybody in a leadership position. But anyway, I'm sticking to the classroom because that's the easiest to illustrate this, but the expectation that the teacher has is inseparable from the self-image, inseparable from the self-concept. And I really do think that that's true. There's a lot of truth to that, at least. And the last two quotes back that up. So now we're going to shift gears here and talk about a study in a third grade classroom done by Jane Elliott. And this one's really chilling. So basically what happened was back in the 1960s, Jane Elliott, who was a third grade teacher, did an experiment in her classroom, and it illustrates how a teacher's authority can influence children's behavior. So, back in April 1968, Jane Elliott made Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. the hero of the month in her classroom. And the reason was because this was the same month that Dr. King was really tragically murdered, and the students had a hard time understanding this, and so her point was she wanted to teach the students about discrimination to help them understand King's death. And so what she did was she divided the students into two groups. She had a blue-eyed student group and a brown-eyed group. So the first day she gave the blue-eyed students special privilege. She told them that they were superior to the brown-eyed children, and she let the blue-eyed children go out to eat first at lunch, and she let them have a longer recess. And now, meanwhile, at the same time, the brown-eyed students were forced to wear collars around their necks, and they were verbally scolded and made to feel inferior. So that was the first day, and then on the next day, she switched the roles up completely. And this time, she had the brown-eyed group get the special privileges, and in contrast, the blue-eyed students now had to wear the collars and were made to feel inferior. And she was really shocked by the results here. On the first day, the blue-eyed children, who were told that they were superiors, adopted the behavior of the superiors. Even model students who didn't seem like they had a mean bone in their body, I can't even talk, but that's, anyway, so even these model students became hostile towards the brown-eyed group. And the brown-eyed students who were treated as the inferiors literally adopted the behavior that you would expect from the inferiors. So what I mean here is that they carried themselves as if they were defeated, and they performed terribly on their schoolwork. And when the roles were switched, the pattern reversed. And so why is this so shocking? Why is this so telling? Well, basically what's going on here in the study is that just because the students were told that they were superior or inferior by the authority figure, they started playing out the roles. They started interacting the roles as if they believed that they were true. And so, now I don't really agree that this was the most positive study for the students. I don't think that this would ever be allowed today. In the modern times, just because it is cruel to have some students wear collars and go around and make them feel like they're inferior, but I'm sure it definitely did help them understand racism and discrimination. So I understand why she did it, and I think that it is a really interesting, really important and significant study, but I don't know that this would ever be allowed to happen again in modern times, although the study has been replicated many times. But anyway, here's a quote from the study. The quote is from William Peters in A Class Divided Then and Now. I have asked each class that has gone through this exercise why they believed me when I said that one group or the other was inferior. The answer has always been the same. They believed me because I was the teacher. So pretty much as I was just saying, the students, they were told that they were inferior, they were given that belief, they were given that expectation, and so they acted that way. And the same with the superior students, right? So whatever the teachers, the point here, it's not about, who had blue eyes, who had brown eyes, who had the collars, who got to go out to recess longer. The point here, let's pull that aside, although it is important. My point here is just that the students were told something was true by the teacher, and they believed it was true, and they acted as if it was true. And so that's really what we're talking about here with teacher expectation and how it drives behavior. So here's a quote, I just skipped over it, but we're coming back to it. This is another one from Dr. Karl Pond, and he says, if the learner thinks of himself as inferior, his actions will tend to be those of an inferior person. and will confirm to his teachers and peers the reasonableness of treating him as inferior. And so basically what the quote's saying here is that someone's told that they're stupid or that they're not as smart or not as good of a student as others, and they believe it, their actions are going to bring that to fruition, right? And so what's really striking about this quote here, it's not just that it's confirming it to the teacher, it's also confirming it to his peers. So, and from the study with Jane Elliott, what happened was the teacher treated the students as they were inferiors. The other group that were told they were superiors picked up on this. They thought it was reasonable. They thought it was okay, which it wasn't okay. But so this is a whole other avenue here. But that diagram that I brought up earlier in the presentation, so it might not be just the teacher's expectations that are being confirmed, right? So if the teacher has an expectation about the student, and they treat the student a certain way, the other students might eventually, over time, start picking that up, consciously or unconsciously, and they might start treating the student in such a way that it reinforces the teacher's belief as well. So I don't really want to go down that avenue now, but that's just an interesting thought. And so we're now at the end of the presentation, and so a couple takeaways here that I have. So the first takeaway is that if you're a mentor, student, teacher, I don't know, older sibling, anybody who is in any kind of leadership position, set high expectations for people. Look for the best in people as much as you can. Try to lift people up, lift up their spirits. Be realistic, but set high expectations. That's one thing I've always tried to do with all my students. If you're working with a student, you're trying to get them to learn math. If you don't believe that they can do it, they're never going to believe that they can do it. So set high expectations for others. And also another takeaway: set high expectations for yourself. Expect a high standard of yourself. Expect that you can achieve good things. And now that doesn't guarantee that you're going to achieve them, but it increases your chances of doing it, right? So if you don't believe you can do something, no matter how hard you try, you're probably not going to be able to do it. Okay, and so the last takeaway here is that if you had a bad experience in education, whether it was early on, elementary school, middle school, high school, or college, maybe you just had that one teacher who, no matter what you did, it was just never enough. It just wasn't good enough. They just saw you in a negative light, no matter what you did. Understand that it probably wasn't your fault, and it may not have had anything to do with you personally. Even if you misbehaved, nobody's perfect. It doesn't really matter. It's all in the past. No matter what you were taught to believe earlier on, it's up to you. If you don't think that those beliefs are going to help you now, you don't have to believe them anymore, right? So you can set your own expectations, and you can free yourself. So, if you had a negative experience with education early on, it's now up to you. It's your choice. You can see yourself how you want to now. You can believe what you want to believe. It's true about yourself. You don't have to be a victim to the past. Okay, and with that, we're now at the end of the video. So I want to say thanks a lot for watching. Let me know what you think. If you have any thoughts on this, whether you agree with me or whether you disagree with me, please let me know down below in the comment section. I'll make sure to read your comments and to respond to each one. And like I said at the beginning, this is not an easy topic to discuss by any means, but it is one that is really important. And keep an eye on this YouTube channel for more videos because I look forward to making them. Check out my website, Test Prep Champions. That's www.testprepchampions.com. And until next time, take care. Again, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate your time.